for more on this, and how come we haven't seen more of this? There's only 3 pages released. Apparently, it's many pages longer. Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin now, a former FBI agent, host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast. Joins us on the phone. Kyle, good to have you with us today. Thank you.
Hey, Vince. Good to talk to you.
Why did it take so long for us to even see 3 pages of this, do you think?
Well, I don't think we would have seen any of this. It looks to me, and I'm operating just based on the visuals we have and sort of the limited information, but it looks like a police officer who took pictures of this notebook on the scene decided that they had enough waiting and that it wasn't going anywhere and it needed to be in the public's eye, which I agree. This should be something that we can look at. If nothing else, for people to understand what sort of threats they're dealing with in the world. And, this looks like there was some reconnaissance that was performed. You see on the op order, which is what I would call it, the sort of the description hour by hour of what was supposed to take place on that day. There's some note on there, going to look for surveillance, going to be looking for security in the parking lot. There's a post-it on there that says lunch maybe between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. ? There's some ongoing investigative activity being done by this individual, by this Audrey Hales, who's looking to accomplish something really horrific. And so even if it's just for the security value to people that are in this, schools and are doing protective details for Christian schools or other schools otherwise, they should know this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of mindset was going on involved. This is very planned out. It's sad. It's kind of juvenile and childlike the way that it's written out, but it's also fairly efficient. It's breaking things down by the numbers and breaking things down by the amount of time. One of the things that's really interesting, Royal Range is mentioned, which is a shooting range in that area, and then the actual amount of time from that parking lot to the school. I did a Google search. It says about 21 minutes, and so she allotted 24 minutes to be able to get there, which is a healthy, sort of margin. So this is not done without working backwards from an objective, and that's a very organized thought pattern. It's also really horrific to read it, just the way that the children are described and sort of the anger and the vitriol that's in there is really disgusting too.
Yes.
I think a lot of this stuff has to do with something that's sort of sad. We're seeing an ideology that has basically been given not as much scrutiny as need be. And one of those is what happens when you take male hormones and put them in bodies that they don't belong in, and what sort of impotent rage do you get? And then when they decide to act on that rage, you and I grew up as young men and probably had some rage moments in our high school and maybe in college when you're kind of feeling surges of testosterone, and you learn how to deal with it. And you also have guardrails, like you either have a father or a father figure,
right.
And then you probably have peers who, if you step out of line, they'll straighten you out and maybe get knocked around a little bit in high school,
Yep.
And you realize what the left and right limit are of being a man. But females don't have that experience, and so if you're in your 20s and you start taking testosterone hormones and male androgens, things may be very different for you, and you don't know how to process that because it's not a sensation you've ever had, and you didn't grow up with it in a way when you didn't have the money to go buy guns, which is all of this stuff is really sad for me, looking at it as a father and looking at it as someone who wants the world to be better than it is.
Right. So that's a really good point. The chemical distortions in her body and what role they may have played in all of this. Additionally, though, I'm looking here, the media love doing this when it comes to somebody who expresses anything within spitting distance of a conservative talking point. Let me just emphasize, she decided that white privilege was the basis for someone to die. She was emphasizing that these kids had so-called white privilege and therefore they were deserving of death. They had their daddy's Mustangs and convertibles and F you little bleeps, with your white privilege. This is a very toxic and apparently deadly ideology. J.D. Vance, the senator, tweeting today, the anti-whiteness movement, mainstreamed by American universities and corporations, has blood on its hands. Kyle, should if we're in the business of assessing ideologies, don't you think this is one we should take a closer look at?
Yeah, I mean, in a broader sense, I don't think we should be assessing ideologies at all. We should assess actual threats and things that do, enter into the criminality.
Yes.
So I don't want people going out and doing pre-crime. I think that's actually bad for all people. I've turned down some media appearances where I was asked to say otherwise because I don't believe in that.
Right.
But if we are going to be looking at where threats exist, there's a mention there that I was almost caught in the summer of 2021. That stood out to me because the FBI, for all of its failings, it theoretically could have a decent mission doing what it claims to do, which is that it's going to prevent certain types of crimes, that it's going to be actively investigating what they call the threat landscape. And 2021, particularly the summer of 2021, we knew that the FBI was obsessed with something else. They were trying to get all of their employees on board with the vaccine mandate, and they were looking at parents at school board meetings instead of, who were ostensibly protesting CRT, critical race theory things, and sort of the use of these types of words like white privilege and otherwise. So they were otherwise occupied, and they weren't involved in the work maybe of looking into this. Like I said, I'm not 100% confident that this is a federal matter ever. I don't really think this is a local crime. Why the FBI even got involved in it is bizarre than maybe like the crime lab resources. But I had friends that have been security guards now. They're retired federal agents that are working as security for this school who just experienced this horrible tragedy. And one of the questions is, why was this not released so they had access to know what kind of tracing was being done, what sort of recon work was being done by this individual, so you can protect against it.
Yes.
And this does have a public value, although it's awful and the parents didn't want it exposed because there's so much vitriol. It's worth knowing what sort of threats exist in this country, and I think parents should be aware of what this kind of ideology brings on people,
and what kind of red flags to look out for the the people in your own life if you start seeing something like this develop.
Imagine being a young white girl who's now confused and thinks that you're a male, and whether you're taking testosterone or not, you're looking at other white people as the problem. That's a very toxic place to exist.
Yes.
And it sounds like from all the things I've read about, her upbringing, that she was shy and troubled and was looking for something to grab onto. And this is a virtue that she was able to grab, it looks like. And that's really, really sad. But we're pushing it not just in schools and not just in academia. We're also pushing government channels, which is really gross.
Yeah, and she killed 3 9-year-olds. That's my daughter's age. It's 4th grade. And she also killed 3 adults. It just so tragic, so monstrous how that all went down. They searched her house, authorities did. They say they found 20 journals, 5 laptops, a suicide note, and other notes as well as 2 memoirs, 5 Covenant school yearbooks. Remember, she was at one point a student at this Christian school, and 7 cell phones. That's a lot of cell phones for one 28-year-old to have. Now, the FBI, as we now know, has been in possession of at least the manifesto, I'm guessing all of this. What possible reason could you envision that they wouldn't have released this to the public?
I think that it goes against the sort of ideology that has captured a lot of government, but specifically the FBI is dealing with this sort of gender ideology, a radical gender ideology at that. At this time, and this is, she mentioned 2021 being a dangerous time. In April, it was either March or April of 2021, the headquarters unit at DC, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for the FBI and the Bureau Equity program was also ridiculous on its face. They pushed out this sort of insane gender orientation, sexual orientation, gender identity training, including some compelled speech about pronouns and some other stuff that was all bought in. Now, it was retracted because overall, I think people that work in federal service don't want to be involved in any of that. But, they bought in hook, line, sinker to this kind of stuff, and it undermines a very small number of very active, radical people that work in federal law enforcement. And they're not the law enforcement agents end of it, by the way. These are the support personnel that have really captured places like the FBI. And so I shared a story with Daily Caller last year. Towards the end of the year, I've reshared again on social media again today because it's relevant that when you have people that are trying to pick winners and losers in life, and that's what's going on, they're trying to pick the winners and losers. That means you cover up for your preferred team if your team does something evil. And we can't have that. This shouldn't be about your ideology and whether you believe that the government should be backing one position or another. It doesn't. It has to be agnostic.
So
it really does.
So somebody who's thinking that way, who's in a position of power in federal law enforcement, if that's the way they're operating, picking winners and losers based on personal identity or demographics, then that means that they're going to go easier on their preferred demographics. Say, a transgender suspect. Let's she's probably fine. Let's not dig too deep here. Whereas maybe a white guy would get more severe scrutiny?
Well, we're already seeing that that was happening. It's resurging because people are going back and looking at Corinne Jean-Pierre and some of the things that she said in the wake of this shooting. And she was saying we really need to embrace the trans community who's been suffering because of it. It's like, how about the 3 9-year-olds, the little children that were killed? And how about the families of the adults that were killed as well? I mean, 6 lives were snuffed out because someone was essentially suicidal and chose to become homicidal based on that.
Yeah.
And some of that has to do with things we don't understand because we haven't been able to dissect what this meant. Like you say, every other shooting that goes on, if there's ever an inkling of white supremacy, it's immediately brought out there. If there's ever an inkling that they didn't like a political candidate on the political left, it's going to be dragged through the mud, and we're going to hear every single item of the diaries. We're going to hear all of their angles that they may have thought about it, and anyone else who may have been threatened. But this one was covered up, and like I said, on its face, it looks absurd because it's not a federal issue, and dead people don't have a right to privacy. Like, Audrey Hale has no right to privacy. First of all, she already sort of subjected herself to scrutiny by engaging in this horrific massacre.
Yeah.
But on top of that, when you no longer live on this earth, you don't have a right to privacy. And so why would this not be exposed and allow us to figure out if there's any value, like the public be able to evaluate it, and hasn't been able to. And it looks like some cop got fed up with this and just finally said 224 days after the fact, somebody's got to hear this stuff because it's been eating at me.
Lastly, on that point, I wanted to ask you, if we lived in normal times, my bias would be for cops to let investigations play out, not to share too much for fear of jeopardizing an investigation. But boy, it seems like it's a public service these days for cops who have their heads on their shoulders to actually share information however they can get it out there, or at least hold on to it and see whether or not the authorities are going to act properly, because that definitely hasn't happened in this case.
100%. We have to be fair. So the possibility of this being, something that would compromise an ongoing investigation, all it would take is, the law enforcement officers that were involved would have to decide, is there a conspiracy here? Are there more people involved? Is there an ongoing threat? Are we going to ruin or jeopardize any criminal prosecution by sharing this information that would unfairly prejudice a jury? Once that's no longer in play, and it sounded like that was not in play very quickly, because otherwise we have to assume that there's an ongoing threat to the public.
Right.
But if that doesn't exist, if this is the sole perpetrator and this person was involved in the crime and is now no longer with us, is deceased, release the body cam footage, which they did. They showed hero cops who did an outstanding job of responding to an active shooter. That's been washed under the mat too. I haven't seen them invited to the White House to receive Presidential Medals of Freedom for saving the number of lives they did. Those men who went in that school, they did it by the book, and they crushed. They absolutely crushed it. They did a fantastic job.
Yes.
They did what I called the Super Bowl of masculinity. They woke up one morning, had no idea as they put on their pants that they were going to be called to act as a man on the highest level and engage an active threat and save lives, putting their life on the line, and they did so. Yeah. They did an outstanding job of it. They had the right tools, training, and so that is the lost story. And once we realize that there's no longer an ongoing threat and that all the individuals that were involved either have been arrested or killed, then it should be public knowledge. There's no good reason to keep this thing from the public. Like I said, for anything that we could value, whether it be about hormones or whether it's about an ongoing threat to schools or for school security personnel to try to figure out if they can shore up the weaknesses in their own protocols, all of this stuff should have been public right away. And the fact that it wasn't tells us that they're picking winners and losers in a way that's unacceptable.
Tells us a lot. Kyle Seraphin, again, former FBI agent, host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast. Thank you as always, sir. Great to talk to you today, Kyle. Appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Good talking to you.